While Queen's Park is back in session today, municipal officials are also hard at work on Toronto's budget for next year. The first in-person consultation brought out over 200 people to the North York Civic Centre Saturday. The mayor and the budget chief, Shelley Carroll, both in attendance. Last year, the city actually introduced these consultations as officials were trying to reduce a roughly $1.8 billion budget shortfall. In addition to those in-person meetings, the city will also be offering residents the chance to take part in a survey or to attend a virtual session. The next in-person meeting coming up on Thursday in Scarborough. Let's talk about this because there is a lot going on. With more on this insight, we are joined by Enid Slack, an expert on financial finance and governance at the University of Toronto. Enid, thank you for joining.
It's a pleasure to be here.
This is fairly new, the in-person or the virtual consultations. Do you believe it is helpful or harmful at this point? Because there is the argument of, well, too many cooks in the kitchen. What do you think?
Well, we have had consultations in the past. It's not all that new. But I think it's really important. I think it's important for two reasons. One is for people to understand the city budget. I mean, the city provides so many services. You know, parks and recreation, libraries, roads, transit, social services, public health, social housing, policing, fire protection. And it's important as an education function for people to actually learn all the things that the city does and how they pay for it. But it's also important for people to have some input into some of those decisions, to say, well, my park isn't doing very well. Right. You know, we need more maintenance in our park. And trade that off against somebody else who's saying, well, our sidewalks need to be fixed. It
is important, transparency-wise, from the government's perspective, but also for people to understand that these books need to be balanced. We were talking a little bit about the operating budget and why it's so important. Can you touch on that a little bit? Right.
So the city has an operating budget. Last year, it was over $17 billion. But provincial legislation requires that they balance their operating budget. They can't run a deficit in their operating budget. So that means, simply, revenues have to equal expenditures.
Sure.
I just named a lot of expenditures, and there's a lot of pressures on the city to make more expenditures. But they have very limited revenue sources. So they have the property tax, land transfer taxes, user fees, and transfers from the other levels of government. And so every year they have to make that balance.
Okay, so let's talk about the revenue streams because this will be key. As we saw last year, municipal property tax raised by 9.5%. That's the largest that we've seen in decades. Keep in mind, though, we haven't seen that jump in some time, so there's a catch-up period. Is the property tax increase just the way of the future where we're going to be seeing more hikes?
Well, you know, again, it depends on how those decisions are made about expenditures, and are we going to cut expenditures or are we going to raise taxes? And as you mentioned, we haven't had increases above the rate of inflation for so many years. And the city has very limited revenue sources. So, you know, depending on the transfers it gets and how much it can charge for user fees for things like transit, water, garbage collection, it rests on the property tax.
We've heard a lot from the municipal level saying, well, we're going to ask the province for this. We're going to ask the feds for this when it comes to money, though that approach may not be sustainable.
That is definitely not sustainable. You know, if you have to go to another order of government, the federal government or provincial governments, every year to balance your budget, that is not sustainable. Because some years they'll say, well, you know, we've got deficits, we can't afford to give you money, or they just may choose not to. You can't keep going back every year to ask for money. I think we need to fundamentally change the system in the sense that we need to figure out what should local governments be doing? What should the city be doing compared to the province and the federal government?
Can that change happen overnight, Enid, or this is a process?
No, it's a process.
Yeah.
It's figuring out who does what and how to pay for it. And that's going to take time. It's been done before. We've had exercises in the past in Ontario where we've looked at what should the province be doing and funding, what should municipalities be funding, and I think it's time to rethink that.
Okay, well, there's a lot here. Enid, appreciate your time. Thank you so much. And as mentioned, there's a lot going on here. So the last day, by the way, if you want to fill out that survey, is coming up on October 31st, and there are more public consultations to come if you want to have your say.